On behalf of the RMIT Arts Management Committee, I would like to thank you all for your participation to the special event today. It is the first time we have this art class in Saigon South Campus. And this is an initiative of the library and the RMIT Art Management Committee. So on this occasion, I would like to introduce the members of the art committee. We have Mr. Ken, Mr. Richard, and also we have Miss Michelle online from Hanoi, and Miss Emma. And the committee also include Professor Rick Bennett and Thierry from SCD. So we together have been working on several activities for our art collection to bring it to you and to the public community. So this is one of the initiatives that we plan for this year. Because we realize that the art collection, our art collection is not only a precious university property, but it's also a great resource for the learning and teaching at RMIT. And it gives us the competitive edge over other institutions. That's why we have this session, and we want you all, everybody at RMIT, to be aware of the art collection, the valuable art collection that we have here.
All right, then. Thanks to everyone for coming, being with us for a short bit. If we can change the slide, please, Rich. What we're going to do is introduce the collection to you. And I'm looking at you like you're online, but there's real people here and online people. You should be seeing the slides if you're in Hanoi. So Rich and I will introduce ourselves quickly, give you some idea of how the session's going to run. We think it'll take about 40 minutes for us to work through an introduction to the collection, including ways we would like to suggest that you can use the collection as students, staff, and lecturers. We'll be running through a few basic ideas related to what constitutes or what sets up the world of contemporary art and where this collection is related to the world of contemporary art. Some of the specifics about what's happening here in Vietnam and at RMIT. Let's get going. Rich, can we change slides? Is that all right?
Want to start with the other presentation? Can we start with the other presentation?
I'll start with one slide first.
Okay, yep.
Thank you.
All right.
So is this some kind of a joke? Is this some kind of a joke? And this, we wanted to start this way, first for its shock value, of course, because this is contemporary art. And so we'd like to suggest that, yes, it is and has always been some kind of a joke. Contemporary art is not just a joke, but we should be able to anticipate some degree of difficulty, some disturbance of common sense, and some degree of misunderstanding when we're looking at contemporary art. So we'd like to, yeah, thanks, we can switch slides. And this has a long history. It's not unusual that we be disturbed by works of art. The origins of contemporary art come about with the transformation of the role of the artist in society. We don't work anymore for kings, queens, and religious bodies. We start to operate as individual actors, making sense of the world around us, so that the sense-making operations are central to the world of contemporary art. How do we make sense, and what do we make sense of? This is a work I'm sure some of you recognize in reproduction, known as the Gioconde, or the Mona Lisa, by Leonardo da Vinci, and its defacing by an artist in the early 20th century by the name of Marcel Duchamp. He draws a little mustache and a little beard on the Mona Lisa. This has to do with our notions of how we make sense in relation to the worlds of art. So let's see one more image before we start. So this question of, is this a joke? What does this mean? And even further than that, are we being tricked? Is a big part of the problems and questions we face, especially as we start to enter into notions of collection. What's worth collecting? Is it embarrassing that we got that? Is it wrong? Will it lose value? Will it lose sense? These are all questions that are at the very foundation of the creation of a collection of contemporary art and at the meaning of contemporary art. We'll see one more image. So we're just going to run through one presentation. Rich will switch over and direct or address directly the Vietnamese collection. Let me frame up a few general questions that we ask when we're in the world of contemporary art. So the first one, what kind of a joke is this actually? Is it a joke, and what kind of a joke is it? Yeah. The next question that we regularly confront in the world of contemporary art are questions about our identities. Those are questions about the individual identity. This, who am I? What am I made of? And questions about our collective identities. Who are we? So can we switch the slides? This, of course, we're going to see very importantly, I think, when Rich addresses the specific collections here in Vietnam and at RMIT in particular. But the question exists for a long time as well in the contemporary world of art. We can see the work of Lorna Simpson here, who is at the time was a young black woman artist asking questions about her identity in the United States in relationship to other images of black women. So the question of how do we make sense, or how do I make sense of my identity, and how do we make sense of my and our identities? It's not limited to the US, it's not limited to a specific time period. We see here the work of Mariko Mori, who's addressing similar questions about the identities of Japanese women in relationship to some heritage, cultural heritage in Japan, the tea ceremony, and related, of course, to some, let's say, speculative design ideas about what we might be wearing in the near future. We'll be talking soon about relationships between other disciplines and the arts. Yeah, we can continue on. The question about our individual identities are often linked to questions about cultural and political identities. So the world of contemporary art is a world full of dangerous parallels. I think we'll getting into some of questions about political and social identities. Here's the work of Ai Weiwei, probably the most recognized and important contemporary Chinese artist, a work that shows at almost life-size dioramas of his imprisonment, and works by the same artist that question the roles of Western capitalism as it encounters Eastern heritage. These are important questions as artists look at the world and the sense-making activities that go on with the images of the world. So blur. The world has gotten, in our contemporary period, especially from the 1980s on, extremely blurred. And because art is involved in sense-making, we use categories and categorical definitions to make sense. What happens when these categories don't oblige us any longer, when they don't make sense, when every day our categories are being crossed? Yeah. This exists for a very long time in the history of the contemporary period. This is an image of the 20th century's most celebrated architect, Le Corbusier, on an ocean liner with the famous fashion, dance, and music star Josephine Baker. The collision of these worlds, media, spectacle, art, fashion, design, this has been going on for a long time. Today, these lines are completely erased. So, yeah, next slide, please, Rich.
I wanted to also comment that
Let me get you a microphone.
our sensibilities of how we interpret this image have changed a lot. We have one non-black person in blackface here, so the way we read that now is certainly much different than when it was taken.
This is the work of Jean-Paul Goude. I'm sure many of you are familiar with him. He worked and still continues to work in the world of fashion as an art director, also responsible for the artwork for many pop music stars, most notably a woman in the line of Josephine Baker by the name of Grace Jones. This is in the period of the 1980s when the art world turned directly towards the crossing of these lines. Yeah. Perhaps most famously in recent times, the work of Jeff Koontz, who married for a very short period an Italian adult film star and pictured himself in image and sculpture in intimate acts with a pornographic movie star. This was central to the identity of the arts community for the period of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. These are kitsch representations, and once again, the notion of how we represent ourselves to ourselves across blurred disciplinary lines is an important part of the contemporary art world and language.
She blurred lines as well. I think she was also a politician for her time.
Exactly. She was an important figure in Italian politics. So once again, when we try to apply disciplinary lines, that's a politician, that's a movie star, that's an art star. These things aren't working for us very well any longer. So when we come to works of contemporary art, we have to be ready to apply interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, or post-disciplinary kinds of thinking in order to understand what might be taking place. It happens as well with new media and the art stars that occur across media lines. This is a work by Namjoon Pike, who's a celebrated media artist, in homage to some of the great figures of contemporary dance and music. Again, celebrity does not necessarily stay in the world of entertainment. It goes across and becomes an important part of our language in the arts. The role of media arts has multiplied rapidly from the early 2000s. This is one of the very early internet artists by the name of Alexi Shulgen, coming from Russia. Again, the world of contemporary art is a world that exists through markets and spaces that are international, as well as local. Yeah. Art is not only so blurred, it's so urban. This is a world of the contemporary urban condition. We've only been living in cities for a brief time of our existence, in urban cities, let's say. Yet, so with the very birth of contemporary art making, we find strong references to urban life. This continues as a central part of what we think about, what we work with. Even the materials of art are often the materials of the city. Next slide, thanks. The spaces of art are not only galleries, collections, and museums, but they also include the walls and surfaces of the city. Yeah, and finally, we intervene as artists directly into the materiality of the city, proposing new functions, new spaces, and new ways of interacting together. This is a work by Thomas Hirschhorn, which invites people in underprivileged neighborhoods to learn more about an Italian philosopher. Yeah, I'm going to go straight over now and leave the microphone in the hands of Rich, who's going to talk about the works in the Vietnamese collection with reference from time to some of these questions that exist as part of the general condition of contemporary art. Thanks for being patient for that.
Thank you for coming. I'm going to transition to something more specific, which is the collection that we have here on our campus. So the plans for the collection began as Building 2 was being constructed. And on the official launching, both the collection and this building were launched. And that was in 2013, I believe. The collection's gone to 2 phases of acquisition. One, the first one for this building, and the administration also wanted to have equal access to art on the Hanoi campus, and that begun in 2016. As you'll see in the next presentations, the collection's quite diverse, both in gender, media, and topics and issues. So I've divided the collection into 3 themes that we can look at it, but there's a lot more that the collection offers that goes beyond these 3 themes. Okay, so we have about 20 slides or so it won't be very long, just to give you an approximation of how long this might be. Okay, so we're talking about contemporary society, or Sahai Đương Đại. Next. This one is on the ground floor. You may have seen it before. It's by Nguyen Thanh Chop. And there's 2 pieces. One is a horizontal orientation, and one is a vertical. This one is the vertical number 5. It's made up of cut strips of newspaper from the normal newspapers that are around at the time. And it occurs just at this transition where much of society is transforming from an analog sort of media culture to a digital one. And it also reminds us of both the kind of confusion that happens in that transition process. In the analog, many of us had black and white TVs or color TVs. We used to get the static on the television set. In the digital world, we get the same thing, but we call it glitch. And so he's a witness to this transformation exactly at that time where much of Vietnam is transforming not only media, but its sort of orientation to the outside world. Okay, next. Phan Thao Nguyen. This work is a part of a larger series called The Education of a Poet. And she's making a commentary on the education that she received growing up, which was a lot of rote education. Sort of a blind faith in the information that you received without having a dialogue or an interaction with that information. And so she's created this series of paintings on X-ray film as a critique and maybe a suggestion that the way that Vietnamese learn needs to change. Next. This is a sketch in graphite pencil. Hoang Nam Viet is a self-trained artist who documents everyday life on the street. So we see an everyday street scene, and I've kind of blown it up here. He's a very good draftsperson as well as a painter, but in time, when we look back on some of these drawings that we have, just like when we see photographs from 50 years ago of Saigon, we're able to draw a lot of information from these observations that artists make at the moment, at the time. This is Phu Nam Thuc Ha. He is an artist that has relocated to Vietnam. I think he was born in Hong Kong. His work, this particular work, he went around to look at government buildings in the city, and he noticed that a lot of the surface area on these buildings resembled abstract paintings. And he called it patination, patina, meaning sort of the effect that you often see on metalworks, whether it's copper oxidizing to green. So that's what we call patina. So he's calling these series of works patinations. And finding that we can see, depending on scale or by perspective, things in different ways. So a government building may be very beautiful in some cases. This is Nguyen Thay's son, who is commenting on the urban environment he lives in. The amazing thing with these works is, from the front, they look like just normal photographs. But they're 3D relief prints. So he's actually taken photographs and he's mounted them on board or another hard material and then cut them out. So you can see here, these are also similar here. Even that's a cutout. That's a real woman. That's a real man. That's a real man. This is a cutout. So it's kind of hard to tell what's real and what's not real, even in the real photograph. So this is actually three-dimensional. There is a work in Rick Bennett's office. If you ever get a chance to see it, you'll see one of them hanging in that office. And this is Bui Kham Khanh. He is an artist. that is based in Hoang, and he's created a number of ceramic pieces, hand-painted, that combine traditional artwork with more of his illustrative style. This is called Industrialization, where he's taking these traditional fish and interlinking them with this network of pipes and tubes. And he's calling this Industrialization. Note that this is 2013. 2016, near his hometown, the Formosa incident happened, and it wiped out almost all of the fish from the central region. And so it's almost a premonition of we need to pay attention to how we're treating the environment and to proceed with our modernization very carefully. Next. Lake Vietnam, he's looking at the urban landscape, usually always devoid of people, and trying to find what an empty place the city can be. This is a pretty amazing piece. This is by Nguyen Huy An. It's called 78 Rhythms of Vinh Bridge. And what he's done is, along the span of the bridge, he's taking a piece of tape in intervals on the bridge, and he's put them on the location of the bridge. And then he's left them there for a month. Then he's come back and he's taken them back. And what is collected on the tape is a level of pollution in that certain area. So this strip shows along the bridge different levels of pollution in Hanoi. And then he's taken that and assembled it in one piece and made an artwork of it. Yep, back one. So you've already mentioned identity. Identity can be collective, it can be individual. Here, we're just gonna really talk about identity and culture. Văn hóa, Văn sắc. Ngo Văn Sak, his work is on campus, and I believe it's in Building 1. In the works that we have by this artist, he's often portrayed portraiture using a technique called pyrography, which is wood burning. So he's wood burned portraits of youth, the young, on these panels, looking about how people feel about their outlook in Vietnam. Okay. This is work of non-urban peoples. This artist had gone to the northwest of Vietnam, and he's recorded portraits of people that he's met there. More interpretive, more expressive. And he had said that there was a wildness with a hint of sadness in their faces and eyes and souls. And this is how he's portrayed them. This is one of our youngest artists in the collection. She goes by the name of Ngọc Nau. This is a good example of where art can really connect with other departments, for example, here, or other disciplines. What this is a video screenshot of a work that's in motion. It's her dressed up in a traditional garments of these dancers that do the Hao Dong. And it's a sort of spiritual movement that's often portrayed in her hometown. And why it looks like that, there's a device, like the Connect looks like this. So she has a Connect machine that's taking her her measurements within space, and it's transforming that into a 3D image, and that's what you see. So we have the video that you can see, but you'll see it's her dancing as a 3D form, sort of as a ghost or an apparition, similar to the spiritual sort of dances that are done in her hometown. She also, a lot of her work comments on Tai Nguyen, which is known for coal. So like many coal towns around the world, China, Vietnam, West Virginia, it's a hard life that's dependent on a lot of pollution, for example, and a society that's trying to turn away from fossil fuels. And the last category is memory. Does anybody recognize what this might look like? Something that's really, really attached to Vietnamese identity at one point, which is no longer attached at all, is writing in Juno. And so there's only a few people in this country that can still read Nom script. He is one of a group of artists who have dedicated much of their practice to trying to work with the Nome script. He's a member of this collective called Zenai. It's a group of Nome scholars trying to find out something from the past which we don't feel maybe is valuable or relevant to today's culture. But when we lose that forever, just like we lose the ability to speak Sumerian, for example, we lose a lot of human information. So artists are also involved in not only looking forward, but looking to the past and bringing that forward with us to increase our knowledge and to know more about who we are and who we were. Next. Hoang Gum, he is, there was a painting, this was downstairs at one point, I believe it's in Hanoi now. He's looking at a recent history, particularly when Chinese refugees had to escape into the Wuming forest, and during that time, this forest has been known in history as a very precarious place for refugees, pirates, and guerrillas. But he also tries to find, people mixed in with the forest historically. Woodcut is a very traditional craft that's been practiced here. This artist is taking, just like Hoang Gum had recorded ordinary life through drawing, this artist is recording his memories through woodcut. And the last piece is Le Phuy Lom. He has a number of pieces. These are based on a time period shortly after the war when the government had asked residents in this area near Benjia, down in the Mekong Delta, to replant the mangrove forest that had been decimated from the war. Okay, next. Oh, this is the last one. I believe this work is in Ligon Cafe here. It's by Nguyen Mang Hum. His dad was a pilot during the war period, and he's talking about his memories of the period after the war when his father had to adjust from being a soldier to being somebody, a father, a domestic life. And so he's repurposed the fighter planes from dropping bombs to doing ordinary things in peacetime. And there's another piece on the Hanoi campus by the same artist. Recently, the collection has been curated last year at the Bao Thang Phu No, which is the Vietnam Women's Museum. No Rain Without Clouds was curated by Michelle and Dr. Emma. And it was a part of a larger program featuring discussions, talks, and I believe this festival will continue this year as well. Here is a picture of Ngo Van Sak's work in the exhibition. And when this was launched, the second round in Hanoi, these were two messages from the president at the time and Rick, talking about the collection being intimately tied with RMIT's community outreach, and that the collection itself should be a resource that is available to everyone, both on campus and outside, both for research and classes. Next. You can access this collection through the RMIT website. The link is here. I believe there's a link on the front page, so it should be very easy to find. Also, supporting materials for the collection can also be located. So for some of the artists, we have their catalogs, we have other documentation or books that feature their works, and I believe those are interlinked as well. Next. You can see more art in the community. This is an exhibition that features two of the artists that are in the collection, currently on to June 6th in District 2 at the Factory, which is a contemporary art space. Next. That's it?
That's it.
No, I thought I had one more. No? That's it. Okay. If you have any questions, Ken and I are happy to try to respond.
Yeah, one thing we wanted to I was screaming into your microphone. One thing we wanted to do was also introduce you to some, or encourage you to think about how you can use the collection, particularly for lecturers that might be here. How can you access the works online? Start to use them as stimulus in different ways for the work you do with students. For students to think about how you can access the work online and here on campus, and think about the ways it can stimulate you to respond perhaps to some of the work you have to do for the assignments that your lecturers will give you. Yeah? So it's an important resource. We've briefly touched on why it's important. The comments in the slide before give us some indication about it as an important way to encourage the artistic community here in Vietnam today. We have to say that if works are not being collected, there are no more artists. You cannot be an artist on your own if nobody wants to collect and show your work. So it's an important way to stimulate the community here in Vietnam, and it's an important way to preserve the work once it's been collected.
It's good to know. I was just visiting an exhibition 2 weeks ago at one of the schools in District 7, and I ran into a former student that is now the executive assistant of the art collectors for that exhibition. And there's other students here that have started collectives within the city, both design and art collectives. So we see a lot of people from RMIT really doing pretty amazing things in the community. And it'd be good to also, on behalf of me being outside of RMIT, to also extend a welcome for collaborations with other universities, such as Đại học Hoa Sen.
We could talk about the role of a collection as part of the marketplace for artworks. It plays a significant role in attributing monetary value, in conserving, protecting, or augmenting that value. It has a social role, and it has a marketplace role. And that's a real thing. It's not something that we should be embarrassed about or ashamed of. It exists as a function of the contemporary economic world. Those people that are in the business programs here might find it a very interesting model for a business community.
Right.
Yeah. You play a role in the art world here.
Well, I think the business world has always been interested in art to some degree, whether as a genuine interest in its aesthetics or its symbolic value, but it's certainly its monetary value has been something that's always been an interest for the financial world, whether as starting a collection or as ways to put things in duty-free ports or a way of hiding money. There's all kinds of the whole span of things that can happen with contemporary art.
We can also perhaps highlight some of the things that happen when we collect. Because RMIT as a university is an active collector in waves, as Rick mentioned. And perhaps we could underline some of the kinds of decision-making that goes on when we decide what's included in a collection.
Right now, we have a committee that's deciding, but if any of you are generally interested in art, the committee has the ability to grow. We would love people to join the committee. So if this is something that you think is right, it doesn't take much time. We meet once a semester, right? Yeah. And we discuss, the events that we should be doing, artists that we're looking at, should any information be corrected. So it's really a small, intimate gathering of people that are interested in art on the campus. So if you are interested, we invite you to step forward.
Yeah, and if you would like to suggest artists of interest, I think we're always open to those suggestions. We can't, of course, guarantee that we're going to run on site and purchase everything that's hanging up or standing around, but we are open to learning about new people and new things that might be happening.
Right, and what we're interested in is always changing. I think one thing we do want to maintain is a diverse collection for many reasons. Emerging artists, mid-career artists, some established artists. We want the gender balance to be equal as much as possible, and we want to continue to range a wide span of media. But all the decisions are made by committee. So there's no preference to one artist or one location. One thing that we do also prefer is to buy from galleries, therefore in art spaces, and not from artists directly. Therefore, we support a larger ecology and keep, it's awful when we see galleries or art spaces close, so we want, especially in these times, it's very difficult to stay open, so we want to maintain our relationship with communities.
It's important to underline the notion of an ecosystem in the world of art. We tend to think of it as individual works by individual artists. Of course, it's a community that exists regionally, nationally, internationally, and the work of a collection is to understand those networks and to participate in them as well. The exhibition in Hanoi was important as the first occasion for the collection to leave the walls of RMIT and present itself in the larger community.
Right. So we'll open up to the floor.
Yeah. Do you guys have questions or remarks you would like to contribute to the discussion?
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Rabin. Actually, I don't have background about art, so I just ask a few questions. So how do you evaluate the art collection at RMIT now, and how to evaluate it in the international market? And what do you think about the contemporary art collections of Vietnam to the world stage?
Right.
It's been recognized or not?
Right. Like I said earlier, that the collection has, younger artists, both mid-career artists and some established ones. Some of those mid-career and established artists are in other collections that are really renowned or have exhibited in MoMA. Some are in the Smithsonian Museum in the United States. So a lot of the artists that we have a very strong reputation. So we expect that their work is significant and meaningful, not only in Vietnam, but more globally. There are a few Vietnamese contemporary art collections existing. RMIT collection is one of maybe a handful, so there's not that many. Most of them are focusing on younger to mid-career artists. So I think the RMIT collection is strong and significant, but it needs to grow over time. It needs to continue in active engagement as the other collections are actively collecting as well. But the unique thing about RMIT is it's an educational institution where others are private collections in many cases. So those works stay within the home or are accessed by fewer people than potentially RMIT Vietnam has.
Yeah, I think it would be hard to actually undervalue the collection here. It is a kind of rare collection, as Rich says, and it's in a situation or an environment that is an important one. Vietnam it's actually a large country internationally in terms of its population. It's growing really rapidly, and the contemporary art scene is evolving very, very quickly. So it's an interesting condition for a collection to exist.
Some of the works that we have begin around the mid-90s, just when the US lifted its embargo against Vietnam in 1995, and that was the first generation of artists that we consider contemporary that were able to leave, mostly from Hanoi, to visit abroad. And so this was the first generation of contemporary artists, and we have quite a few of those early artists from Hanoi in our collection.
Yeah, the work in the collection is probably, for a contemporary collection, a little bit more pictorial than you might have for collections that are based in other countries or in more international settings. In part because of the very specific political history of Vietnam, but also because of the pictorial traditions here.
Yeah.
There was another question, I think? No?
Yeah.
Hanoi?
I have a question.
Sure.
We all know how valuable our art collection is, and especially within the contemporary Vietnamese art. But let's think broader. So how is it when putting it in a broader context in the international contemporary art? So what's the value?
Like the value, sort of the symbolic value?
Yeah, you mean cultural
Cultural value?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, anytime that a collection is made, there's some sort of idea or thought into that collection about what it should be. So it's an arrangement. It's an arrangement or a concept. And concepts can be shared and interchanged with other institutions. That we have a collection that's focused on what is Vietnam now, meaning from maybe the mid-90s to 2020, which is like 30 years, right? That's a 30-year snapshot, which is a whole generation already. What is that generation? What was it concerned about? What changes did it see? Like we saw it in one piece. We went through a change of using public phones with coins to digital phones. That all happened within the timeline of this collection. Society has changed a lot. And we have those artists at the very front of that. Some that were living in the times when they were still rationing, for example, to now where everything is really online, for example. So what can it connect with other institutions? One thing we may look at in the future, RMIT Vietnam can also connect with the RMIT larger collection in Melbourne, perhaps, for an exchange of ideas, if not works in the future. And then from there, moving on to engaging other institutions. I would like to see it engage other institutions regionally. Maybe RMIT has an exchange with Silpakorn University in Thailand to look at the Mekong region changing over the last 25 years. That might be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, yeah, it's a remark really, rather than a question. I've only been here a few months, and I noticed my own personal travels, the target audience I find in galleries in Asia tends to be younger people. If you go to Europe, England,
Right.
majority of the audience are like old fogies like me,
Right.
you know? Which is quite interesting, that shift
Mm.
in generation of people who appreciate art. Or maybe the younger people here see art in a different way to the people in Europe sees art.
Right.
I don't know if you noticed that or aware of the situation.
We do see a young audiences. I mean, I think that also maybe speaks to some of the blurring between entertainment and culture that often happens. We often, and a lot of artists themselves will do visual artwork and then be VJs at a club, for example. So there's maybe a lot of fluidity between genres or what is perceived as high culture or low culture. But I think it's encouraging to see young people at art events. It shows that there's an interest for the future. And so I'm quite happy about that, if we can get younger people. Ken?
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's
Yeah.
no more questions, we
In
can.
Hanoi? Anybody in Hanoi?
You can type it in.
Quiet.
Or
Yeah.
One other questions.
Yeah, good. That's what we're here for.
Well, I think it's when he was talking about the young generation start to interest more in art, but my generations, and especially the generation Z, we see art in a more pop culture way, which including Instagram filters
Right.
and digitalizations
Yeah.
of the art. So is that considered the contemporary art, or it's just a trend?
that's the beauty of contemporary. Contemporary art can be anything.
But it's a little bit fusion. It's not the main. It's not like the way we see like traditional arts.
Right.
It's more a fusion, like a hot pot of everything.
And I think that hot pot is really what's attractive to the more traditional spaces now, because it's new genres, it's new ways of mixing things together. So right now we see this whole thing that you may have read about NFTs, people taking JPEGs and selling them for like $66 million at Christie's. And it's not only just, you know, a small segment of the art market. Now you're seeing a bunch of celebrities jumping on board. If you look at entertainment news, you'll see like, oh, I want to release my next album as an NFT, or my next song, or my next image. Whether this is going to be long-lived or not, nobody knows, but it's certainly attracted the attention of artists, but entertainment, all kinds, financial, particularly the financial sector. So all of this gets blended together. But a lot of the good works that are coming out of your generation are hybrids. And because, why? Because many times you're forced to be a hybrid. You know, your generation, not my generation too, don't expect to work at one job and have that for life, right? We need to multitask. We need to take a lot of inputs and put a lot of outputs at the same time. So we become these kind of, you know, mixes. So if that's the way you are, then that's the way art in society is. So it's a perfect reflection, I think, for contemporary art.
Yeah, a big part of the growth of art since the 80s has been the inclusion of digital work.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that slowed down that growth was the fact that it could easily be copied, that there was no original, so that in the kind of network of view between artists, galleries, who are salespeople basically, and collectors, that had to be cleaned up in order for an explosion of digital work to take place. One of the things that's cleaning it up is now this exclusivity of some digital works. And that allows for the marketplace to operate with question of rarity. Whereas before, if everything could be copied and given away for free, it was hard for a collector to say, I want that, I'm going to buy that, I'm going to put my wealth in there, hold on to it until what my wealth grows. But now, with exactly the kind of technology that Rich is talking about, this allows for people to say exactly that. It's a one of a kind. I can put 70,000 euros, dollars into it, and because it's one of a kind, that becomes a storehouse for my wealth.
It's also
an important part. Again, it's the embarrassing underside of the art world, except for those people who live in it, and it's the basic operation mode. Making things, selling things, buying them, putting them on display, and hoping that the values increase. It's part of the world of contemporary art.
The upside that people had said with NFTs was traditionally artists sell a work to somebody, a collector, and they receive the money, but that's all the money they'll ever receive for that work. As it goes to other institutions, its value raises, gets sold for millions of dollars, the artist will never see any of that. So what they said with this blockchain technology is you could be a part in every transaction that is made, the artist would get a piece of that, which is very utopian, but it could work. The downside of that is many artists are really concerned about social issues, environmental issues. Mining for digital currencies takes a massive amounts of electricity or energy that I think one person calculated to mint his NFT, it used more energy than his studio used all year. It takes so much energy at the cost of the environment, at the cost of so many other things to get that effect. So there's a lot of questions about art, money, environment, and practice that is today. Okay, great. We are going to go on a short tour, if you are interested, to get the blood moving again. The works really will just be down on the ground floor. There's three artists on the ground floor, and then we'll move up to building 1 to work our way towards Ligon to see Nguyen Mang Hum's work, and I believe Ngoven Sak's woodburns are also in that. So you get to see a variety of different types of artists and media. And I'll give you a little information about each of the artists that I can dredge out of my head, hopefully, while we're there. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.